Good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. This is SABIF, San Antonio Black International Film Festival's Real Talk, and we are honoring Women's History Month for the month of March. We have a wonderful film that we'd like to share with you. I'm Ada Bobineau, the founder and director, and I'd like to bring on the filmmaker whose feature you just seen. If you're watching our YouTube channel or our website, sabif.tv. So I want to bring to the stage. Here you go. I got to always change my background when I do that. This is Sophia Sangai, and it is a pleasure to have you. I want to thank you for sharing short on the remarkable Jayne Kennedy with us. Sophia is my God, actress and voiceover professor and filmmaker, and I can go on, right? But
Sure.
we want to welcome you to SABIF. And I just want to, I always like to, when we get started, I always like to just get a sense of, your filmmaker journey. I know you started as a journalist, but I just want to want you to tell us a little bit about your background, your creative journey, and what really fueled you to, with the interest to become a filmmaker.
Oh no, yeah, no, I started as a filmmaker. When I was started in college, my major was filmmaking, and I continued with filmmaking throughout college and graduate school. I definitely when I started in school, I was initially an economics major, and I thought that that would be, the right way to go in life, which it probably was. But eventually, my first film class, I knew that I wanted to, to go into filmmaking because my professor at the time really demystified the filmmaking process. And then overall, I just gravitated to anything that was storytelling. So that could be literature, that could be animation, that could be, dance, pottery, whatever, but not just art, but specifically storytelling. So anything that was based in history, anything that was based in the sort of cyclical nature of life, that something is plaguing someone their entire life, and then even to their even decades after the instigating factor happens. So it's more the sociology of people and peoples that I was gravitated towards. And so yes, but I studied film my entire career, and then I did go into journalism as an anchor woman and a news reporter, and I worked for documentary shows as well as I worked for TV news programs. And then I was a professor through much of that period of time. And then after a few, working at about two schools, I believe. Now I work at University of Nevada, Reno, in Reno, Nevada. And it is, a wonderful experience. My students are very talented and very gifted and all of that. And so now I don't do journalism anymore for the most part. I am more or less entirely a fiction filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, music videos, commercials, whatever, anything, all things that can be, all things storytelling.
Well, I want to go back further than you starting in college. Like what sparked your interest to want to tell stories? When you were a little girl, was there something or someone who inspired you? Can you just kind of take us back?
Sure. The very first thing that really always stuck with me was just the written word. So people like Toni Morrison, specifically Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, Alice Walker. Let's see, the Harlem Renaissance era, all the authors that came from that time period, and then W.B. Du Bois, as well as Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass. There were so many people that, they said in my report card from the second grade, they said she doesn't like to read any of the cartoon books. She only wants to read biographies. So
wow.
I remember being really disgusted that they would put these little children's books with little, animals, like looking for an apple pie or something like what am I supposed to get from this? I just didn't understand what the point was. And then in middle school, we would read these books like the Babysitter's Club. And I'm like, I don't get it. What was the point of that? I just felt like people wasted my time. And I remember we were reading Babysitter's Club. We were reading a Judy Blume book, which had merit to it, right? There was certainly merit to it, but it just left me feeling like, okay, I guess so. It's sort of a normal thing that happens in life. There's, this puberty situation that it felt like people were exaggerating those chapters of life. And then when I would read specifically Black literature, and I would say there were some other, there were maybe Anne Frank and then Elie Wiesel and people like that, just different times where there was a political crisis in the world, in the world of the people. That's when I was interested. I was like, okay, I want to know about that. That's all I cared about. I didn't care about anything that had to do with, I remember they gave us like a Berenstain Bears book, and I'm like, what was that for? Like, I was so mad. I'm like, what, why did we do this? And I just felt like it was too like babyish. I wasn't going to grow up and live in a bubble. I was going to grow up and live in the same world my parents and grandparents and great grandparents lived in. And I needed to know how to prepare myself. So that's what I felt that literature specifically did. And then I was always winning creative writing competitions from second grade, third grade, anything like Black History Month competitions. Most people would write about Dr. King, which he deserves to be written about as many times as people want to write about him, because he really, he put his entire life and his family's life on the line on behalf of all of us. But I would usually choose people who were not as well known. So like in the second grade, I did my Black History Month essay on Lorraine Hansberry. And I had seen this PBS documentary about her at the time. And I just was so, shocked that she had taken her, I was so impressed by the fact that she had taken her family story and turned it into A Raisin in the Sun. And that also the fact that her husband at the time and other friends of hers could finish her book that she wasn't able to finish because she passed away from breast cancer. So she finished they finished Young, Gifted, and Black for her. And I was like, wow, like you can pick up a book and, take that someone hasn't finished and finish it for them. You know what I mean? Like that was just amazing that someone would, it wouldn't just get lost. So I always thought that was very impressive. I remember reading about Ida B. Wells, something like that happened with her. I think she was writing her autobiography and she passed away before it was finished, and others had to come together to help finish that. And so I just thought that was such an important thing to do, is to, have something where you are painting a picture of the life, that your perspective on the life that you were living, and someone who wasn't, who was 100 years later or 200 years later could read the same thing and just be in the same world with you. That was just such an impressive thing to me. And the way that people wrote, and especially the part of the turn of the century, in the turn of the 20th century, from the 1800s to the 1900s, the work was just so brilliant. I mean, that time period, they wrote so well, and they didn't have anything like radio. They didn't have television. They didn't have any of these things. Yeah. And so the language has to deliver. It has to give you everything. And I really appreciated all my English teachers, my family, because my family, they cared very much about, after like Alex Haley's Roots came out, the family went and researched our family. And so we found really about, I would say, 9 generations of our family, all the way back to the Revolutionary War in the early 1700s. And so, I always had, when white people would say, oh, well, we're originally from the Vikings, or we're originally from, like some other, I knew where I was from. I knew my family story for a long span of time, definitely 200 to 300 years. And I knew stories about them. It wasn't just a name and all that kind of stuff. So, and the thing is that when you find out stories of people who are kind of your deep ancestors, it's very interesting, because they a lot of times have a lot in common with you. Not just where they were born or something like that, but also what they care about, what kind of occupations they went into, different struggles that they went through, maybe their downfall in life, like the thing that was their Achilles heel, all of that. And if you know your history, then you have a chance of not repeating it.
But you sound like you were one of those kids, like one of those exceptional kids. Where did you come from? Education? Were your parents teachers or educators? Or like where'd you where is Songhai? Where is that family history from? Because that's a unique last name.
It's a West African civilization. It's the Songhai Empire, which is in present day Mali. And there's the Ghanaian Empire, the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, the Zulu Empire. There's many West African empires, but the Songhai Empire is what produced Mansa Musa and Sundiata. And those people were, Mansa Musa was like the richest man in the world. He created two capitals of the Songhai Empire, which one of them was Jayne and the other one was Timbuktu. So when people say, oh, if you don't eat your vegetables, I'm gonna send you to Timbuktu, it was a real place that people sent their children to study. So Timbuktu was a place of education, and it was available to all people of all classes, male, female children, and they were sent there to be educated at the zenith of their intelligence and their aptitude. So it was an effort from Mansa Musa to change the discrimination, essentially, between different groups of people and class. He gave gold to the poor, so that he destabilized economies, so the wealthy weren't wealthy anymore. People always want to make movies about him because of the impact. And so I was born in Philadelphia, and I was raised between Philadelphia and Boston. And so Philadelphia and Boston, actually, they both care very deeply about Black history and African, people of the African diaspora and the history of what we're doing all over the planet. So I read about the Songhai Empire when I was in the 10th grade, I believe. So I knew about Black American history and the history of my family, certainly, because my family were a part of all American history. Every war that was fought, it's like probably 25 people in my family that went to Howard. My grandfather went to Howard, my aunt went to Howard, and
Oh, wow.
numerous cousins and uncles and all kinds of people. I mean, every time I call an aunt, it's like, oh, your cousin's going to Howard. I'm like, I would expect as much. We're very much a Howard family. And then if we didn't go to Howard, we went to Ivy League schools. So like when I was growing up, my cousins and stuff were at Stanford, or they were at Yale, or they were at Harvard, or that wasn't normal. I didn't know there were even other schools outside of the Ivy League schools and Howard, really, and then
But Songhai is your name. That's your dad's name, Songhai?
No, that's the name I adopted. It's an African name. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I wanted to.
No, I'm African American. I'm African American. So similar to say how Malcolm X, changed his name to have a placeholder of X. It was after hearing the stories of African people that I went forward and changed my name, because all the other names that we have usually are derived from slave owners. And really, to me, I consider them to be terrorists, so I consider them to be terrorists and hostage takers. And if I were looking that person in the face, I would immediately change my name. If I knew the person who branded everyone with their surname, I would, if I saw what they did to my ancestors as well. So I knew I was going to change my name in about the 8th grade.
Wow.
I didn't know what I was going to change it to until the 10th grade. And I didn't change it until I was, I think, 25. I changed it around somewhere in my early 20s. I changed, the name, because I knew I was going to do a lot of stuff with my life. And I didn't want to have, the vestiges or the long shadow of a slave owner over all the things that I was going to do. So, yeah, I wanted the Songhai Empire's name.
I love it. Well, I love it. You are awesome, because our theme this year for SABIF is activism, action, vision. So having action and putting it to a vision, and I think that you represent that so well. Even just hearing you right now with the story about your name is amazing. So what drives you in terms of the topics and the subject matters that you choose to make films about? And are you specifically more interested in documentaries or what's your okay?
Fiction film, but specifically something called narrative nonfiction. So narrative nonfiction is where it's similar to what Jada Pinkett did recently. Jada Pinkett Smith did with the Cleopatra film, where there is a reenactment on top of a documentary. So I'm definitely interested in real stories. I'm definitely interested in biopics, as well as, but I'm also interested in other genres like science fiction. Not necessarily like the horror film genre per se. That doesn't really resonate that well with Black people. We're already in a horror film, so they don't need to go to another one. But I think the main thing about film is that it's escapism, right? And so when you're watching different films, you have to think who's my demographic and what world do they want to escape to, right? That's always what any filmmaker has to decide before they make a story. They can make any story they want to, but then when they bring it to market, they have to decide who is this demographic, who wants this raisin bread, right? And then after that, you have to decide what for film, it's escapism. People want to leave the world that they currently reside in and go somewhere else. And so the films that I make specifically are, I always imagine an auction block, and an auction block where everybody that you've ever loved and were about to love, right? People that you saw at a distance and you thought they looked like someone that you wanted to meet, as well as people that you would already, take up real estate in your heart, right? And they're all about to be sold in every different direction on the compass, every direction, and you'll never see them again. You can't reach out to them. You can't hold them. And but yet every muscle and cell in your body is reaching for them, and they're reaching for you. And so I always imagine, what would it be like if that moment had not happened for all these African-American families, for all these Black families, and these African people who were displaced across an entire ocean? What would it be like to have that love restored, to make it so that we can protect each other, to make it so that we can stand, with our chest against the muzzle of a gun, the barrel of a gun, and bend that metal, and just for even thinking that it was going to take our life. I always find that to be the escape that Black Americans, African Americans want. And that's what I provide, is this, the feeling of love that we can protect, a love that we can restore, and restore Black men to the position of being protectors of Black women, to make it so that we are, as Black women, the number one thing in the world, and we don't have to defend ourselves. We don't have to be the person to, be the front face or square up with whoever the enemy is. And because I find that a lot of films want us to be the first line of defense. And I'm not interested in being the first line of defense. It's like that isn't actually my position in the family model, and it's not for most women in family models. So, but they have, this country has in reversed the roles of men and women and made it so that men are emasculated in many forms of media, and that they turn on their own women. And so much of my work shows and illustrates specifically Black men protecting Black women, and then and protecting not just their physical, but their mind, their spirit, and them being successful in the end of protecting their families, protecting everyone that they love, because that's really what's going to set us back on track. And so my films, this film, for example, is a film that is, yes, Jayne Kennedy is the person who pushes forward to secure the position at CBS NFL Today. However, she's helped out by a number of Black men. There's Irv Cross, there's Jim Brown, there's Muhammad Ali, who says, I will only do this for my friend Jayne. He's absolutely clear that he will go the distance for his friend. And these are all friends of hers. These are all work friends and colleagues and people who, are there. They have what they have in this world, but they want to see a system make it. And that experience has happened for me in my lifetime. Certainly, I'm pursuing a very male-dominated industry. There aren't even a discernible number of Black women directors in Hollywood. It's not even it's like it is a handful. It is not even in the double digits of Black women who are consistently directing industry-backed films. And industry-backed films are like, there's over just under 1,700 industry-backed films, which means they have like the budget. They have the budget, they have the A-list celebrities, they have the team and all that kind of stuff. And so, people are going to mention Ava DuVernay's name a million times over and make you think that it's a million Black women, and it's not. It's just one Black woman, and she's excellent.
That's why I was gonna say. That's why but I was saying that's why I admire that stance that she made, that only Black women direct Queen Sugar. I mean, to me, that's
she didn't make that stance. She said only women can direct Queen Sugar. If you look at the directors, they are not Black women. Okay, they're actually women. They're not Black women. So it's about 2/3 white women and 1/3 Black women. That's the problem.
Okay, I didn't know that. I was more
because everyone feels that way. Everyone thinks that she said only Black women. She said only women, and people put in there the idea of Black. I thought the same thing, and then I looked it up, and I was like, oh, okay. It's not. It's 2/3 of the directors of Queen Sugar, specifically Queen Sugar, are white women. And no one's in the situation that we're in as Black women to direct anything. But it's fine. Like I have a plan to prevail over to wage war against the machine, and that's what we're in the process of doing right now. But I think the main thing is that it's not about just making stories. It's about making a living making stories. It's about making wealth making stories, and making wealth making stories that make it so your people feel complete. They feel whole. They don't feel like you ripped their elbows and kneecaps off and you left them out there in the cold naked and shaken. You want them to feel like, okay, like how you have like a green drink and you're like, I feel amazing. Like, you don't feel just like caffeinated. You feel like instead you're nourished. And so that's the goal, to create work that is of the same caliber and production value of the people that we recognize as the top film directors, but the stories are coming from our emergency services, right? Like we are going to be the ones to make sure that we encourage the sense of partnership between Black men and Black women, a cornerstone of family, that people's families are restored, that we get to a place where that family can then restore the community. And I have very big plans for what it is I'm going to do in filmmaking. It's not really making films; it's a movement to get the minds of our people back together. Because I think, it's like 85% of Black school children can't read. In most districts, there's not a district in America where African American children at this time period can read at a level. It's no higher. It's no higher than 20%. So it's only like it's 15 to 20% of African American students can read, and therefore 80 to 85% cannot. That's the world that we're living in. They're just passing people through. And as a college professor, I can see it. I can see what's happening. It's still very difficult to contend with it because they act like it's optional, and then they get all this misinformation. And so what we're going to have to do is create media that informs them, that is, because if they're right at this current time, they're not engaged in reading, which is the answer. That's the answer out of everything. Like,
Wow.
all your problems are solved if you just learn how to read and take it up as something that is not a punitive thing, but it is something that is, it's a pastime. If this is what you
Right.
do in your
Right.
spare time, then that's how you develop the mind to be a problem solver, and you don't feel
Well,
like you're being batted around by the wind. You know,
that number is surprising in
Agreed.
this day and age. That's really
Mhm.
scary
And the
because
number
it's
of
getting
Black people on the
worse with the AI and all that coming in.
yeah,
They can do it
absolutely,
for
yeah.
you. It's like,
Hmm.
ooh. Let me ask you this: in terms of, I remember growing up, and I would see Jayne Kennedy on the you see her in A and Jet, you see her on the
Hmm.
Sportscast, and so I always admired her from afar and how she was able to be in that position. But for you, like, why Jayne Kennedy for you to do the film on? Why was there a connection with you with her as a subject matter? Can you
Oh,
talk about
sure.
that?
So, because I went into journalism and all of that, I definitely, well, actually, I went into the Miss America pageant system when I was in my early 20s. And so, any Black woman who achieved any level of success in the pageant world, I knew all about them, right? And so, she was a winner of the Miss Ohio competition, and she went on to Miss USA. She then placed in the top 15 of Miss USA, and she at the time she was the only African American person to ever achieve any type of, like, selection process on any level, to be called out. So there had been other Black women who had competed in Miss USA, only one other actually, but
Hmm.
Jayne at the time was the only person who had ever made it to top anything from Miss America, Miss USA, or anything at that point. That was 1970. And
I was
so
going to
she
ask
was
you the year. Okay,
yeah, she
1970.
was. That was 1970. She was the first Black woman to win Miss Ohio, and then Miss USA. She was the second Black woman to compete. But then she was the only Black woman of any major pageant system or any pageant system that was other than the Miss Black USA or Miss Black America pageant. Of course, that's obviously for us.
Wow.
But she was the
Wow.
only Black woman to ever place outside of in the history of America at that point. And so my grandparents and my parents, they loved Jayne Kennedy. Everything, every magazine, anything that she did, it had its own section in the house. And so there
Wow.
were Jet magazines and Ebony magazines, and anything that she had ever been in was in its own section of the house. And so I knew that she was a big deal. It's just at the time that I was growing up, she wasn't on TV. Like, she didn't have a regular recurring role. So
Mhm.
I didn't experience it, but I knew that she was a big deal. And so I knew that it didn't matter that I wasn't aware of her, because there were many people who were famous before I was born. There were lots of people. And so when I started learning about, like, Pam Grier and, just like, like all the blaxploitation films, like Superfly and, all that kind of
Right.
stuff, and Shaft and Richard Roundtree, I was like, oh, so she's from that era. She's famous when these
Mhm.
people, everything came. So I knew that that was her time period that she made the biggest
Mhm.
splash. And so I really never knew that she was a sportscaster at all. I just knew she was an actress, and she had been a spokesperson, and she had been all types of commercial, spokesperson type personality, TV personality, I suppose. But
Mhm.
then there was a grant for a sports related documentary through the Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival
Mhm.
and the Arizona Sports Global Sports Initiative. So I applied for that grant, and I just was like, well, I really was not, very well versed in sports or sports history or anything like that. But I just was thinking, I was like, I wonder who the first Black woman sportscaster is, because sportscasting is a really big job. That's a job that everybody wants. It's very coveted. Everybody is like, oh, high demand. People would love to
Mhm.
just be in the ESPN studios, getting somebody's coffee and dry cleaning, because it's
Mhm.
like they can get that close, they feel accomplished, right? So I was like, well, who's the first Black woman to ever get that? And so when I Googled it, Jayne Kennedy's name popped up, and I'm like, wow, like, what hasn't she done? So I reached
Wow.
out to her. I reached out to a cousin of mine who reached out to another cousin, and then they got in touch with Jayne Kennedy Overton. And then about 2 days later, she called me back. I had already submitted the grant based on whatever I could find online. And then when she told me the real story, I was like, I was so, you know, it was so devastating. All the things that she had to go through just to get in the door, and then the backstabbing, all the things that they did to her when she got in, and the fact that she was able to keep her mind together. And and then when the tally light comes on the camera, she is looking like she's happy, and none of this is phasing her, and yet she doesn't know who's going to try to backstab her next, and she's being set
Right.
up, blindsided. And many African American people in their respective careers and jobs, the same things happen to them. They're
Mhm.
let into a job, reluctantly. People hire them, don't want to hire them, and then they end up in a situation where people are trying to set them up. act like they stole this, or they, come late. Like they just create different scenarios to make it seem like you're culpable for your own firing, or, that you're incompetent or what have you. And so, that was the counterstrike to the Civil Rights Acts. That was what American big business decided to do, is to, we'll bring you in, but we won't pay you. Sure, we'll bring you in, but we'll bring you right back out. You're going to be a temporary employee. You're in the mix, but you don't have the same contract as the other people that you're sitting next to. You don't have the same authority. You don't have the same upward mobility in the job. You can't climb there's no way for you to climb up out of the position that you're in. If you're working here, you're going to be in that position forever, that type of thing. So, and there's no one to tell you what to expect, because no one's ever done it before.
Right.
The first person to do it. So no one can give you a manual, a playbook. They can't scratch out a map on a napkin for you. They can't tell you what the next steps will be. So she's, certainly she went into sportscasting at that time, but every field in America had a Black person or 100 Black people who were the first people to go after the thing that we could not have before, and that's all the baby boomer generation and the greatest generation people. Those two generations of people were the first, usually the ones who had to face this world by themselves, and with people who had just finished, against people who had just finished, throwing fire bombs into their houses and spitting on them, and and threatening their lives. I mean, we had to go to work with people who their families were those exact people, or they were that person. So that's, this isn't like mean girls in high school who don't want to sit with you at the table. There's people who are glad to take your life and the life of your children and your spouse and your parents and everybody that you care about. Back to the auction block again, right? So that's why my films are all about the auction block and being able to keep all the people that you love and stand against the people who are going to tear your heart in 10 different directions or more. And to fight against them.
That analogy, I mean, that's very visual. That analogy is very powerful. But I gotta rewind you. I didn't want to stop you when you were talking. But you called a cousin, you called a cousin, you called a cousin.
Yes.
So calling cousins because there's a family connection with Jayne.
Oh, sure. So my Jayne is she's my mom's cousin. And so I only met her one time when I was like 5 years old. But my mom, and I remember my mom telling me all about, like, so Jayne was walking down the hallway. It was like a hotel that we were all staying in with our my aunt and uncle and my mom. And there was, like, I think my grandmother was there as well. There were a few people, in this hotel room. And so they were, we knew that Jayne was coming by. And so my mom was trying to explain to me very quickly who she was. And she was like, she's an actress and she's famous and she's a big deal. And she's like, don't mess this up, okay? Like that. She'll be really nice and look her in the eye. And it's like, and I could hear Jayne's like heels walking closer to the door. And I was like, all right, here we go, And then the doors open. I mean, she was just like breathtaking. I mean, she was just, it was, and I remember looking at my mom like, you weren't playing, like, she is beautiful. And then she has this beautiful voice, and she was extra tall. Like, I'd never seen a woman that tall before. So it was like everything my mom had, and she only had seconds to prepare me for, like not doing some weird little 5-year-old kid stuff. She was like, you better act right, get it together, and be clear with whatever you're saying.
That's cute.
And it happened. I mean, I don't think I failed her. I was like, "Dad, too good," got it big, and it was worth it. I mean, that impression that she had on me. I always knew that she was a big deal in our family. There were a lot of people who were also in the arts. Of course, my mom was also in television. She was a new TV news editor and a camera woman. She's the first Black camera woman in Philadelphia TV news. She went to Northwestern. She founded a TV show called Visions, which is still in existence. It's an Emmy award-winning show that my mom founded, right after she graduated from college. So, it is definitely a part of the family business of what we do, I guess. But then, but the main thing is that when I went to NYU, I called Jayne Kennedy up and I asked her, I said, I really want to make biopics similar to What's Love Got to Do with It, Lady Sings the Blues, the Dorothy Dandridge story, films like that. And I want to make your film. I want to make your film because her life story is, I mean, before she even turned 30 years old. I mean, let alone 35. Like, don't, every 2 months, she's kicking in another door of segregation. And I think one of the things I really appreciate about her story is that people don't often speak about this when they talk about the film, but the colorism, right? So it's like a lot of times African-American people think that, lighter skinned Black people just kind of have like a red carpet for them in life. And I think this film shows that that's not the case, and there's a clip that I found when I was researching the film where Oprah was saying, she goes, y'all remember Jayne Kennedy? And then the audience were like, yeah. And she goes, well, they'll let someone like her be on, but someone like me, it's not going to, and I'm like, that wasn't, they were being discriminatory against both of you. both Oprah Winfrey and Jayne Kennedy are around the same age. They're like 3 years apart in age. They both they just didn't know that the other person was going through this. And Jayne's been on Oprah's show before and all that. But, at the time that Jayne was on CBS NFL Today, Oprah was in Baltimore and starting her career. And then even before that, she was in Tennessee. She's the first Black woman to become an anchor woman in, I believe, Nashville, Tennessee. So, it's like, but that perception that we have that white people prefer or, look at light-skinned people and let them have the life of Riley is absolutely not the case. And it never has been the case. And I've always thought that was, we're not Black because of blood quantums. We're Black because we were, considered by law the oppressed group of people by one drop. That's all that it had to be. That's all that it was required for you to be hunted and, to have your life, lower than any farm animal and treated in a way that was specifically intended for mental torture, physical torture, in an attempt to disconnect you from God. That's that's all that you can access. You can't access someone's spirit, right? The only thing that you can try to do is scramble their brain and then hurt and break their bones. And so they, every effort to destroy us was made, but it had nothing to do with the hue of our skin. And I think Jayne is such a great example because no one really knows what she went through. And in terms of the racism that was, aimed her direction because she is so physically beautiful, but she is that crossover talent that white men were looking at over their own women because she was on CBS NFL Today. And although there are other women, Black women who are gorgeous and exceptional, they weren't the crossover talent that, made it so that Black women were a threat. Because in what world is there the only woman on the show is a Black woman? And everybody else is something else. Like that doesn't really happen that often. And if it does happen, it's because of people like Jayne Kennedy making it a paradigm that is palatable for white audiences. And this was a male dominated. This is a male. The demographic is mostly Black, mostly white men watching football at that time. And in between watching the game, they were looking at Jayne like, "Who's that?"
Right. And I think the film covers that really well, just in terms of just when you go into about the pay, how she wasn't paid on the equivalent that her counterparts were. There was just so much,
which is like sharecropping.
Yeah.
I mean, her colleagues were getting paid $1 million, and Brent Musburger was getting paid $5 million.
I remember
and she was getting paid, 60,000, 40,000.
Oh, that's just 10,000. Unbelievable. And nobody stood up for her.
No one stands up for Black people now. That's why Taraji P. Henson, Jaimin Hansu, Terrence Howard, Leslie Jones, obviously Monique and other people are all talking about the pay disparity. Because when Black people say like, oh, we survived this and we survived that, it's like, yeah, they kidnapped us from Africa so we would survive. we were brought here to be used. Yeah. That's why you still have Black people pursuing, these dreams and careers, and they're amazing and brilliant and all that. And they still have to work twice as hard, 3 times, 4, 6, 7, 20, whatever number of times as hard. And there's no way to explain that to other Black people that you're not getting paid enough, because they hear, oh, you got paid $30,000 to do a movie. And they're like, wow, that's a lot of money. And it's like, it isn't when you look at a white counterpart is getting paid. They're getting paid 10, 15, 20 million.
Yeah. So we had a perception of her for sure. But for you, for doing the film and also her being in the family and hearing all these great things about her, you talk about the colorism, but what is something that, is there anything else really that stuck with you that you learned about her that you did not know when you started? That gave you a bigger or broader appreciation for her?
A zillion things. For example, she was...
can't do a zillion, but okay.
Well, she was on Wonder Woman, for example, right? And the story of Wonder Woman is that it's an island of women who are like Wonder Woman, and one of them is Nubia. And so she played Nubia on the Linda Carter version of Wonder Woman. And after she played Nubia, and she had this beautiful purple dress on, very, nicely designed character, in terms of hair and makeup and costume, there was a action figure that they released called Nubia that looks exactly like Jayne Kennedy. They obviously modeled the doll after her and didn't give her $1. Stole her likeness, stole her image, stole everything, about her, and made this doll and put it on the market. Because this is
Mattel Barbie.
It's on. If you go on eBay and you type in, Nubia. I found it on eBay and it was like 400.
Wow.
It was on sale for $400. But it was, a limited edition. But she was one of the first action stars, if you will, Black action stars, if not the first. I don't know of any other Black, comic book characters that they made a doll out of, an action figure, I should say. So yeah, that's one of the things. And then
Did she sue? Was she able to sue?
there's not like, the idea that suing is always really an option. It doesn't, they're in charge of the law, right? As well as the media. It's all connected.
That part.
So it's
that
like,
part.
it's like going to someone's parents and saying, hey, they stole my bike. And, the parents are liars too. So, like that's the situation that you're in. And so the main thing is, it's again, they pick Black people from impoverished backgrounds, which most of us are from, maybe we're from working class backgrounds, maybe we're from, lower middle class, something like that. But none of us are from, wealthy backgrounds. And then they, give us this opportunity to be famous. And the thing is that although, yes, of course, to be alive, you need water and oxygen and food and all that, but you also need love. And so when you're a Black person in America and you are in a situation where you know that maybe you're loved by your family, maybe you're not, but then you go out into the world and you know that the country that you are a citizen of, one, you're not a citizen of that country, and two, or no one treats you like you're a citizen, and then two, the country that you live in doesn't love you. So now you're only, so if you try to do
Kamala Harris saw that clearly recently.
Well, and she got 75 million votes, at the same time, and who knows about the other guy's votes? Who knows where you got those from? I'm not sure where
that part. But anyway,
but I know she earned 75 million votes, right, and she worked on every level of government. But I think, with Jayne Kennedy, it's the idea of her deciding to go off and do a nationwide type of reach. Every time that they wanted to, have her in a program or something, she was intentionally wearing an Afro wig. Like she was always letting Black people know, I'm for you. I'm one of you. Like I am doing this for my people. And that's one of the main things that I really admire about her and anyone else who takes that stance, that they are pursuing this not for their own personal gain, right? But they're doing it. They know that all eyes are on them. And so what they did to her at CBS NFL Today was so disheartening, because when she lost the job, Black people were in the airports coming up to her saying, how could you do that to us? Because they felt that she let them down. And so these people are setting her up to be hurt. I mean, it's just, it's definitely like the effort that she put into building a career. And it was also, for example, I wasn't able to put this into the short version of the film, but one of the things is that she has a clothing sponsor. When you're on TV, you have people who sponsor your clothing and your hair, and sometimes like things like eyebrows and things like that, right? And so when she had that opportunity, she went to a Black clothing designer, and all her clothes on CBS NFL Today were designed by a Black clothing designer that got their ad or their information in the credits of every single show. And she went to New York and found a Black clothing, and she didn't have to. And the thing is, just imagine it today, all the Black people who are in movies and TV shows and musicians and all that kind of stuff, if they went to Black fashion designers. That's just what we did, right? Like we don't go to anybody else but Black fashion designers. And it's, again, when people are like, oh, well, who are you wearing? And you're saying, this is a Lakeisha Washington original, it's like, that's what we need to be doing, is basically promoting our own stuff. And she was that person. She was doing that back then, and she didn't have to.
Wow. That's great to know. Yeah.
That's something that we can all do without ever having, I did that when I was an anchor woman. I had a Black clothing designer, it's the same type of personality.
Yeah.
It's always just like,
it's the concept of think Black first. They do that all the time. Even a crew in a film, or just working together. And that's one of the things I try to do with this film festival.
You do successfully.
Yeah, Black first, but it's a different mentality here in San Antonio. So coming from DC, you really have to readjust and try to just figure it out how to keep doing that. Yes. But anyway, so what do you want audiences? What's the biggest thing you want audiences to walk away with after they see this film? And do you plan to make a longer version? I'm just wondering.
At this time, I think so Jayne has come out with her autobiography, and she wants people to buy that autobiography. Yeah. So her autobiography is entitled Plain Jayne. And there's pre-orders right now. It's in Barnes & Noble and all other major bookstores. She's doing a book tour. So that energy of making a feature film should probably go to her autobiography and increasing those sales and all of that. And she'll be at many of those book signings. And in addition to that, she just became a grandmother. So she has a beautiful baby grandson, and that's her continuation. Her bloodline, is continuing, and she has beautiful, 4 beautiful daughters, and this is her first grandson. And I think she's married off like 3 of the 4 daughters at this point. So she's definitely dug. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's Jayne with a Y. So it's Jayne for the
Oh,
like
Jayne. Let me
yes.
correct that.
No,
Like that incomplete. Okay, I'm sorry.
but just so people know, and she's on the book tour with that. So I definitely am not just specifically documentary. I'm fiction film. I'm documentary. I'm just storytelling. Like I like music videos. I like commercials. There's nothing, I like photography. I could do any of those things. Have done all of those things, and will continue to. So I think the main thing now is I've been asked to direct 25 movies after the success of this film. So I'm in the process of kind of like doing all the pre-production work for all of those films, and just making sure that those films are that the stories are very well prepared, before we go into production. And
Mhm.
so I'm either a producer
Mhm.
or I am a director of these 25 films, and it's like I have to kind of dig into the world of the story and help bring the story out of someone. It's a story that I'm not making, so it's not my script. And I also don't have to fundraise, which I'm thrilled about that, because I can't stand fundraising. It is like so bad.
Yeah,
Like
it's a
why
drag.
can't I just recycle cans? Like why is it so hard? But yeah, their scripts usually are not thoroughly fleshed out, of course, and so you have to sit down and build a bear with the screenplay. And that's my strength, is writing and creative writing, and
Mhm.
building something that is layered, and that you understand all the B characters, their motivation and what they want, and then you just you have this big clash. You have to have this
Yeah.
really suspenseful, and you have to have a cinematic approach. Like, so a lot of times, unfortunately, some Black films, they just want to tell something, but I'm like, that's not how you get people's emotions. You have to show, you have to make people feel things through the artistry. So it's the form, not the function.
Mhm.
So if we go in the direction of like informing people that, I don't know, like, let's see, like, I think her name was Harriet Jacobs, but Harriet Jacobs, I think that's her name, is Harriet Jacobs, but she was stuck she hid in an attic for 7 years to escape
Mhm.
slavery. That's information, right? Like, that's true. And that is, an interesting fact. But how do I make you feel that? How do I make you feel the 7 years
Mm.
in the attic to avoid, slavery? So that's what, say, like a Toni Morrison did with the story of Margaret Garner.
Yeah.
She created that off of she created Beloved and the character Setha off of a real woman. She found an article in a newspaper, I believe, when she was at Howard University, and she found this article of a woman who had escaped slavery, and all four of her children, the slave owner came back to retrieve his property, which was her and her
Right.
kids. She only had a brief
Mm.
window of time to do something. And so she
Mhm.
decided to put her children in heaven. And that meant that she had to take their life. And so she very rapidly tried to take their life. But from that information, that's what Toni Morrison made Beloved. So that's
Mhm.
more or less, what I mean. I'm versed in, slave narratives, and really all the major stories, and even smaller stories that people don't know about. Are usually, I'm kind of like, most people are like, oh, I don't want to see a slave movie. I'm like, they're the people who are going to explain to you how to get out of your day, how to get out of the issues that you're facing today. They were facing the monster, right,
Mm.
in full glory. And
Oh
so
yeah. Oh
it's like,
yeah.
we need to go back and look at the playbook from 1700s and 1800s and 1900s and every other time period before now. Because as we can see, it doesn't, the whole thing was written with perhaps invisible ink. All the laws that were changed, they were
Mm.
definitely written in
Wow,
pencil.
that's
They could be
deep.
erased, as we're
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
watching all this work of all these people be erased. And that's one of the things I want African American people to do, is to connect, the newest, youngest generations with really deep seated history. People like Jayne Kennedy, like anyone who's a Black woman sportscaster or an anchor person, they should just know everything about her. They should know everything about her, and
Exactly.
other Black women like her, and Black men, who were the forerunners,
Yeah.
in having such a critical position. I mean, at the time that she did this, there was only 3 TV networks. So you're not going to
Mm.
be able to get your
Yeah.
news on TV, but from 3 places. And the story of who you are as a Black person is going to come through a white person, unless we have people
Mhm.
like Jayne Kennedy say the
Mhm.
time is now. And like
Mhm.
yesterday, I got into this argument with this guy because he was like, well, I don't go where I'm not wanted. And he was talking about this clip from Oprah Winfrey with Forsyth County, right? And they weren't letting
Mhm.
Black people live in this county. And I was like, well, if you're only going to live where you're wanted, then that's nowhere, because you're not wanted in this
Mhm.
country. You're like, they're going to decide where you get to live, and you're going to be piled up in projects, or you're going to be in shotgun houses in Mississippi. You're going to be in the bottoms. You're going to be somewhere that is going to be the worst topsoil, the worst oxygen, the
Oh,
worst
yep.
conditions. And that's where they're going to allow you to live. And don't try to turn all that into something that is survivable, because then they'll set it on fire. So I was like, you can't live your life in a way where you
Mhm.
just allow people to move you around the chessboard. So, even the pawn has
Wow.
power if it can get to
Girl,
the
I'd
other
love to
side.
be your students. No, I was just thinking your students are so lucky to have you. I mean, you have just like the journalist in you. You have so much information and so much power. And that's from starting at second grade reading. that's
Definitely.
it. This is your example.
It's true.
But
It is
listen, I want to thank you so much. This has
true.
been a
Thanks for
treat.
watching the film,
I can't,
everybody.
yeah. And I want to put up I had your website up and I want to put that up again early because I think it's important for people to go to your website and see other works, and to see how to reach you. But we look forward to seeing more works. I mean, it just sounds exciting, some things that you have in your mind, in your head, in your connections, resources to develop further. So we look forward to that. So where can I just wanted to ask one thing. What did Jayne say after she saw the film? I mean,
Sure.
how did she
Well,
respond?
she had final say on the film, so she the depiction of her in the film, she had final say. She is an executive producer of the film because of that. So I edited it and I put the bullet points together of how the story would go, and of course, put it together. But then, the final version of the film was she had to sign off on it. So she definitely was pleased with the depiction, and this is how it happened. I was responsible for all of the factual part of it, and then she was responsible for the emotional part. So how did this event make you feel? And I had to make sure it happened on Tuesday at 2 o'clock, on 1978, like on this street and that street. I had to make sure that everything that I put in the film matched with the public record. So,
Wow.
so that was a lot of work. I mean, that was a lot of work. I worked with several research librarians and all of that to make sure that it was accurate. And I had to go, buy a bunch of magazines on eBay, and I had to go through the stacks, and I had to go find all these different corroborating evidence of what she was
Right.
saying. Unfortunately, there were many articles about around that time that discussed the discrimination that she had faced from other people's vantage points watching her
How long did it
experience.
take you to put everything together? I'm
Oh,
sorry.
it took
I'm
me,
sorry.
I would say six
The
months.
connection was going bad.
Oh, I would say it's like it took me 6 months of just researching everything. So I transcribed every tape. We shot for 2 days. That took a long time. And then in my transcription, I also have to say, like, she's laughing at this point, she's smiling, she stutters. I have to make sure I have notes on every point, which was very time consuming and painful. And after that, I had to sit down and then make the story structure chronologically. And then I had to go find anything that she said. She said, oh, I graduated in, 1960, whatever. I had to go find her high school yearbook that confirmed that. I had to make sure I had something that said this happened the way she said it happened. And that's where it
Wow.
became very time consuming because I couldn't edit until I had everything confirmed. So,
Mm-hmm.
so I had to go find all kinds of stuff. And I mean, it's like when she talks about the gingerbread restaurant or the ginger man restaurant, and that whole thing, I was like, where am I going to find this footage? And I remember it took me like 2 days of just like thinking, what are the search engine things I need to find? Like, how do I find this footage? Because it wasn't even an important part of the show, right? It was just like a side thing where Phyllis George is, just talking to people at the bar. And I'm like, where is this going to even be? Like, this isn't even part of the game. And then I don't even remember what it is that I searched, but I had to start searching Phyllis George at that point because I needed to find that clip. And when that clip just fell into my lap, and and Jayne's like, she goes, is it called the gingerbread restaurant? And then like Phyllis George is like, we're here at the ginger man, where we're doing it. I was like, like I found it. I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is it, this is it. And it just perfectly like matched. And then Jayne's like, and of course with her husband, and then like she's like, and of course my husband. And I was like, oh, like I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is great. Like it was just perfectly just stitched together. And I was like, this is crazy. And I wanted the whole thing to feel like you were experiencing a memory along with Jayne Kennedy with the editing. And so that was very important to make sure that people felt like, just because you can move on from things, but then when you go back and think about something, you're like, they really did do me dirty. Like, that you just, and it hurts all over again. So I wanted her to feel, I wanted us to feel what she felt at the time it was happening, not having been delivered from it and healed from it, but when it was like, like a raw wound on your heart. And that's when she says, my heart was broken. And that's exactly how you feel when you give everything to a job and they don't appreciate you. They set you up. They don't pay. I mean, like, what else? What didn't they do? So I just wanted people to understand that they are not alone if that's happening to them at their job, because it's happening at my job. I've had similar things happen, years later when I was an anchor woman. And I just think that everybody who, is because I think when something happens to you and you're a Black person, you're like, is it me? Am I imagining? It's like,
right.
It's like, maybe I was late. I thought I was 2 hours early, but maybe my clock is wrong. You're over there really trying to figure out, like, is it me? And then you're like, it's not me, and that's where but it's a setup, and they set people up for you. I remember, like, even when I was an anchorwoman at one job, this man came up to me on the street and he said, you know, they don't hire but one of you at a time, and none of them are darker than you. And that's what he told me. He was a black man, and he said, you know, they only hire one black person at a time, and they never get any darker than you. And that next day, my news director, she was talking about Halle Berry, and she was like trying to compare me to Halle Berry, and like, oh, you know, you kind of look like Halle Berry, but that's the only type of black woman that she thought was attractive. That was it. And so I made it a point to always talk about like Jennifer Hudson and like all these. I was like, well, you know, but Pete Nyong'o. I mean, wow, you know, I was just like always trying to be like, we are not going to sit up here and just act like one type of black woman is the only thing. But that's what they wanted. You know,
Right.
that was the only type of black woman that they wanted to be allowed to go and be broke but famous. So that was the whole that dynamic. You know, that I just think that, you know, people, because technology changes so fast now, younger people don't understand that there's nothing new under the sun. And they need all the stories of people that have lived and died before them, who are still here right now, who are 99 and a half years old. You know, they can see 100, but still it's far, you know, it's still 6 months away. Like, you still need all those stories. It's exactly whatever happened to them. It's going to help you not choose the wrong door. You know, on the game show of life. You know, if there's 10 doors, you're not going to pick the wrong one and then lose all your winnings, right? So I just think that that's a big part of just organizing our people, because we're just a people that we're a group of people that are always under attack. And we, of course, are just made out of flesh and bone. It seems like we're superheroes because of how we rebound from it, right? But we're not. We're just
resilience. You know, we some resilient people. I tell you.
Things. Right. So I just that's the main thing with that project. And then I do want to make other films about other types of people. Like, I want to make a film about Lola Falana. I really love her story. And she came up at the same time. She was also a part of the CBS, push in the late 1970s. She had her own television show, the Lola Falana Show. And she was also this big, sex symbol, if you will. But then she has this accident, and she prays to God to deliver her from the accident so that she can walk again. And when, that happens, she doesn't want to go back to being a sex symbol, because she's like, how am I going to be appreciative of God if I go back to just, use my body to, to compel people to sex. And so she's still alive. She lives in Brooklyn. She's in her 80s, I believe. And
you gotta get her. Yes.
Wow. I'm working.
No, because that's a name we don't even hear anymore.
Remember like Sanford and Son, you're like Red Fox. You always be like,
I remember her well. I remember the Lola Falana show. I was little, but I remember.
And that's what I want to do. I just want to take, because there were so many Black women who had shows in earlier chapters of American television history, like Hattie McDaniel, like the Beulah Show, and then oh my gosh, Diane Carroll had a show. There's all these different people that were leaders, and so it's like I just always find it interesting that they were even able to get to a place where they had control or creative control. Because the thing is that we're not a monolith, but white people aren't a monolith either. That's the thing about it, is that they're trying to, the same game that they play on Black people has to be played on white people too, in order for us to have this battle. And and that's one of the reasons even like why Dr. King was assassinated, because he was about to bond with and promote the issues of poor whites. That's one of the main reasons why they moved in on him. And then also the involvement in the Vietnam War and how poor whites were being manipulated. So it's just, that is always an issue. And the poor white, or poor and lower class, middle class, working class white people, they're the foundation, they're the base of the Republicans, because they get them on the same, they find one little strand of Venn diagram of intersection, and then they build their entire, movement off of that. And so but we have more in common with them than they have with rich white people. Like poor white people have more in common with Black people by far than they do with rich white people.
Yeah, right.
Because they are miseducated too. Yeah. In order for all this to work, we all have to be miseducated. We have to be miseducated as Black people, and white people have to be miseducated. They have to be, because if they're educated properly, the whole thing falls apart. And it falls apart in like 2 weeks. All you need is a fortnight.
Wow. Well, preach. No, you're right. I want to thank you. We're going to have to wrap it up, but I want to thank you for your action vision, and just keep it up, keep it going. We're looking forward to many more projects following this. Hopefully you can submit them into San Antonio Black International Film Festival. Yes.
Thank you for building this. Thank you for creating this.
Yeah.
It's you.
You're welcome.
Forever. Howard forever.
Yes, it's you, girl. Well, take care. You have a good rest of your week. Thank you again.